Alright guys, welcome into part 3 of our Afghan war series. Today we ask the incredibly important question, why did we go to war in Afghanistan in the first place? So, when going to war, I think it's really important for you, for us, for any country to ask, why are we going to war in the first place? Because, among other things, war involves killing people, blowing things up, destroying land, destroying infrastructure. If you're going to do this, I think it's really important to have a really solid reason and goal for actually engaging in warfare. So when evaluating the reasons why the Bush administration in America invaded Afghanistan, I want to point towards a speech that President Bush gave in October of 2002 and see if we can't understand the sort of initial goals of the invasion. So this is what President Bush says. He says, quote, "This military action is part of our campaign against terrorism. Today we focus on Afghanistan, but the battle is broader. Every nation has a choice to make in this conflict. There is no neutral ground. If any government sponsors the outlaws and killers of innocents, they have become outlaws and murderers themselves, and they will take that lonely path at their own peril." So, two really important things to note here. The first one is this. In this speech, there was no real mention of a long-term state-building effort in Afghanistan, right? The main point was, get rid of Al-Qaeda, the terrorists, and drive Taliban from their power base. The most President Bush mentions about state building is this: the oppressed people of Afghanistan will know the generosity of America and our allies. As we strike military targets, we'll also drop food, medicine, and supplies to the starving and suffering men and women and children of Afghanistan. Now, as nice as that sentiment might be, that does sort of limit what the U.S. original role was supposed to be in Afghanistan. So that's the first point. The second point is this. They couch this in terms, like I said before, of a broader war in terrorism. What's that? Like, I'm looking for terrorism. Is it like a word, terrorism? Is it an emotion? I don't know what that means, but what it does mean, at least in part, is that it's borderless. It's international. So this is part of the reason for the justification of the war in Iraq and for various other military operations in various other nations. So the goal here, get rid of Al-Qaeda, get rid of the Taliban, right? No mention of state building. But the Bush administration and others might argue that if you just get rid of the Taliban and you just wipe the slate clean in Afghanistan and you pull out, what do you leave in its place? Probably the argument is you need to do some sort of state building in order to address the initial conditions that led to the Taliban in the first place. Now, I think this is a powerful argument. I think that's probably a true argument. The realist concern with this is that the U.S. and the allies went about building a state in Afghanistan the wrong way. That is, they went about building a massive, centralized state, a huge state, which requires a lot of institutions, a lot of people, huge governance, structures, all of these things that Afghanistan, probably amongst all the nations in the world, was one of the least able to accomplish this, right? It would take years and years and years, i.e. it has taken years and years and years. So it's our argument on this channel that the U.S. should have gone about state building in a much less centralized, huge way, but they didn't. And the biggest side effect of all this is that corruption in Afghanistan has ran rampant through the entire society. So to make this point about how rampant corruption is in the society, General Allen, who was the commander of the forces in Afghanistan until recently, when he left Afghanistan, when he was coming back, he was making a statement at a think tank, and he said, corruption is the #1 existential threat to Afghan society. Now think about that. This is a commander whose job was to protect his troops, protect Afghanistan from Taliban and terrorists, and he says the #1 threat isn't the terrorists, it's not the Taliban, it's corruption within the domestic government. And that should just point to how rampant, how horrible, and how systemic the corruption is in Afghanistan. So how does this corruption manifest itself? Well, it manifests itself in a number of ways. Probably the biggest way in sort of every sector of government and society is bribery, right? If you want to get something done, you got to have a bribe in tow. Patronism, right? So people giving or appointing people to certain positions in whatever ministry, whatever government or private sector position, who they're friends with, who they're families with, who they have interests with. There's corruption in the police forces. There's corruption in government. There's corruption in the drug trafficking trade, right? Which is probably the biggest export that Afghanistan has, is illegal opium. And, you've got different warlords, different government officials who are sort of in bed with the drug traffic and with the opium producers, right? Who have a stake in seeing this system continue. You've got judicial corruptions, bribing judges, bribing prosecutors and defenses. You've got corruption in the education system. The list goes on and on and on. And I guess the argument for this channel is that this is what happens when you try to institute sort of a huge Western bureaucratic style government in a place that has never had any tradition of having this massive democratic, bureaucratic structure, you're going to get this type of corruption. And the other reason why this is so hard to have this as one centralized massive government is the Taliban can attack different outposts around the country. It's a delegitimizing effect. These Taliban attacks have a delegitimizing effect on the country. And they do this because if a government can't keep its citizens safe, it's not a very legitimate government. And so, what would have been a better option? We think at this channel, a better option would have been to diffuse the power through different power bases in the country. And you say, look, in this sector, you guys are the prominent tribe or the prominent family or ethnic group. You guys can have a much more federated control over your area. You can do it the way you guys want to do it and sort of have these pockets of federalized control instead of trying to build one huge centralized form of government that's based in Kabul. So to finish this episode, let's just bring it all back to the beginning. Why did we invade Afghanistan? Well, Afghanistan was a place that was harboring terrorists, and these terrorists attacked the United States. So the best thing we could have done is A, get rid of the terrorists, but B, create a system of governments in Afghanistan that was A, sustainable, and B, did not provide a sort of hybrid training ground or a facility or space for terrorists to be in. Now, the US and her allies thought that the best way to do this was to go about doing a massive state-building effort. We're arguing on this channel that given the history of Afghanistan, given its infrastructure, its education level, etc., this was a bad idea. They should have opted for a much more federalized system, sharing power with different tribal and ethnic leaders on the ground. Sweet, well that's all for this week, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you like what you see, share the videos, comment below if you want, and remember, reality always trumps ideology. Oh, and by the way, if you guys ever find any terrorism, if you can find this nebulous terrorism that's floating around and we can hold on to it and fight it, you let me know. You just let me know.